Chapter 5. News from Mr. Havisham. The news went round the village and the farms faster than a carriage with 6 horses. "Did you hear? The vicar went up to the castle and spoke to the Earl about poor Mr. Higgins. And the boy was there, little Lord Fauntleroy. Yes, and the Earl said to his grandson, 'You write to Mr. Newick, you tell him,' and the boy did. And the vicar took the letter to Mr. Newick, and now Mr. Newick can't put poor Higgins and his family out in the street. Yes, and they've got another month to find the rent." Days and weeks went past, and by now everybody knew about Lord Fauntleroy and his mother. They loved the boy, with his golden curly hair and his happy smile. They saw him every day on his new pony, and he always had a friendly word for everyone. The village people loved Mrs. Errol too, because of her kind heart and her sweet face. When somebody was ill in the village, Mrs. Errol was always there to help. But the Earl never saw her, never spoke to her, never went to her house. Cedric, of course, saw her every day, but his heart was sad because his best friend did not live with him in the same house. The Earl liked his little grandson more and more every week. He often forgot about his painful foot, and he began to smile more. Sometimes he even laughed. He liked to please his grandson. When Lord Fauntleroy wanted new houses for some very poor villagers, the Earl built new houses. When the boy wanted to talk about his mother, the Earl listened, but he did not like it. "Do you never forget about your mother?" he said to his grandson one day. "No," said Cedric, "never, and she never forgets about me. I don't forget about you, you know, when I'm away." The young lord did not forget his friends in America either. Letters went to and from New York, and Dick and Mr. Hobbs heard all about Cedric's new life. One day, the Earl gave a great party, and all the important families for miles around came to it, to meet Lord Fauntleroy. Mr. Havisham came from London too, but he was very quiet all evening and looked worried. At the end of the party, the Earl spoke to him. "Well, Havisham, what's the matter?" "I bring some bad news, my lord, about your heir." "My heir? Fauntleroy is my heir. What do you mean?" "My lord," said Mr. Havisham, "Cedric Errol is not your heir. He is not Lord Fauntleroy. The true Lord Fauntleroy is the son of your oldest son, Bevis, and at the moment he is in London with his mother." The Earl's face was as white as his hair. "Bevis?" he said. "This isn't true. Havisham, tell me this isn't true." "A woman came to my office this morning," said Mr. Havisham. "Bevis married her 6 years ago in London. She has all the papers. He left her after a year, but she had a son. He's now 5 years old. The woman is American. She's beautiful, but, well, she can only just write her name, and she's only interested in the money." The Earl's face was now dark red. He jumped up from his chair and began to walk up and down the room. "Bevis was always the worst," he said angrily. "I hated him, and he hated me. I must stop this. Cedric is very dear to me, Havisham, very dear. He's a fine boy, and he's going to be a better Earl of Dorincourt than me, or any child of Bevis's." Far away in New York, 2 of Cedric's friends sat round a table in a grocery store. They ate a supper of bread and cold meat, and talked about Lord Fauntleroy. Dick usually came round to the grocery store once a week. He and Mr. Hobbs were now good friends, and they enjoyed reading the letters from England and talking about them. When they wrote back to Cedric, Mr. Hobbs helped Dick with his writing, because writing was difficult for Dick. "I didn't get much time for school, see?" Dick told Mr. Hobbs one day. "Pa and Ma were dead, and there was no money, so me and my brother worked." "That was your brother Ben, was it?" Mr. Hobbs said. "Yeah, my older brother," said Dick. "He was good to me, Ben was. But then he married this girl, and oh dear, she was bad news. She was a good-looking girl, big black eyes, long black hair, but she was always angry about something or somebody, me or Ben or the baby. I remember she broke a plate on Ben's head once. She hit the baby, too. A nice mother she was." "Women," said Mr. Hobbs. "Best to keep away from them, I say. I never married." "Well, she didn't stay long," Dick said. "She was angry with Ben because he didn't make money faster. So one day she left, with the baby. We never saw her again. She left New York, someone told us." "What happened to your brother?" Mr. Hobbs asked. "Ben's out in California now, working with horses on a big farm somewhere. He was sad about Minna and his baby son for a long time. Poor old Ben." After supper, Mr. Hobbs took out a letter. "This came from our friend today," he said. "Let's read it together now." He opened the letter, and they began to read. "My dear friend, Mr. Hobbs, I have some surprising news to tell you and Dick. I am not Lord Fauntleroy, because my Uncle Bevis, he is dead, had a little boy, but nobody knew about him. My Uncle Bevis was the oldest son of the Earl, and so his son is Lord Fauntleroy, and I am just Cedric Errol again. My papa was the youngest son, and youngest sons don't have anything, so I am not very rich, and I am going to learn to work, perhaps with horses, because I like them a lot. My grandfather is very angry about it, and I never saw him angry before. With love, from your old friend, Cedric Errol, not Lord Fauntleroy.
"Well," said Mr. Hobbs, "well, I don't know. Did you ever hear anything like that before?"
No, I didn't, said Dick. But I know one thing. Young Cedric needs his friends at a time like this. Let's write back to him, Mr. Hobbs, and let's do it now.
Chapter 6. News from America. The story about the new Lord Fauntleroy was soon in all the newspapers in England. And in Dorincourt village, of course, nobody could stop talking about it. "The Earl is so angry about it. He doesn't like the woman, and he doesn't want the boy."
"Yes, and they say he's got 20 lawyers in London, all working on it, looking into things, asking questions." "Did you see the woman, Bevis's wife, when she came to the castle with her boy? She's a tall, black-eyed thing with a hard face. Not a nice woman, and nothing like our sweet, kind Mrs. Errol. And the boy's nothing, when you think about our dear little lord." "How's it all going to end?" "Who knows?"
When the Earl told Lord Fauntleroy the news, the boy listened carefully. Then he asked, with a worried look in his big brown eyes,
"Can they take Dearest's house away from her?"
"No," the Earl said. "They can take nothing from her."
"Ah," said Cedric, "I'm so pleased about that."
He thought for a minute, then looked up at his grandfather.
"And that other boy," he said a little shakily, "he's going to be your boy now, and live with you, isn't he?"
"No," the Earl said again. "No, he's not." Cedric was very surprised. He jumped up from his chair and began to smile.
"Can I still be your boy then? I'm not going to be an earl one day, but that doesn't matter, does it? I just want to be your boy, always."
The Earl looked down at his little grandson. "My boy," he said, and, this is true, his voice was a little shaky too. And there was something in those old, angry black eyes
something new, something different.
Yes, you're my boy, my only boy, the best boy in my life.
Cedric's face went red, and he looked very happy. That's all right, then. I was a little worried, but not now. The Earl put his hand on the boy's head.
You are right for Dorincourt, and, well, who knows? But always remember, you are my boy, first and last.
The Earl talked many times with Mr. Havisham about Bevis's wife and son, and Mr. Havisham talked with other lawyers in London. There were questions about the woman's story. When was her son born? Where was he born? She was Bevis's wife because she had the marriage papers. But was all her story true? Some days later, a visitor came to Court Lodge. The servant, her eyes big with surprise, ran to find Mrs. Errol. "It's the Earl, Mrs. Errol," she said. "The Earl's here." When Mrs. Errol came into her sitting room, she found a tall old man with white hair. He stared at her.
The boy is very like you, he said.
"People say that, my lord," Mrs. Errol said.
You don't want your son to be the Earl of Dorincourt, do you? The Earl said.
"It's a fine thing to be an earl," said Mrs. Errol quietly, "but it's more important for my son to be a true, kind, brave man like his father."
Not like his grandfather, you mean,
said the Earl. "I don't know his grandfather." Mrs. Errol looked up into his face. "But I know that Cedric loves you." The Earl began to walk up and down the room.
Yes, and the boy is very dear to me, he said. I'm an old man, tired of life. But then I found someone to live for. And now this other boy. Havisham told you about him.
He came back and stood in front of Mrs. Errol.
I am miserable, he said. Miserable.
Again, his voice was a little shaky.
I hated you once. I don't know why. I came to see you because you are like the boy, and the boy loves you, and I love him. Be kind to me because of the boy.
Mrs. Errol had a kind, loving heart. She put her hand on the Earl's arm. "Why don't you sit down for a moment? You are tired and unhappy." The Earl sat down, and they drank tea together and talked. He watched her sweet face and listened to her quiet voice, and he began to feel a little better. Before he went away, he looked around the room.
This is a happy room, he said. Can I come again and talk to you?
"Of course, my lord. Come when you like." The English newspapers could not stop writing about the Lord Fauntleroy story. And soon, American newspapers began to write about it too. Mr. Hobbs read everything, and he and Dick talked about it every day. Dick was a very good bootblack, and a lot of people came to him. One of them was a young lawyer, and one day he gave Dick his newspaper. "Here's a paper for you, Dick," he said. "This one's got pictures in it. An English castle, and this English earl and his son's wife. Well, she says she's his son's wife, but the earl says not. I don't... Hey, Dick, what's the matter?" Dick stared at the picture in the newspaper with his mouth open. He saw a good-looking young woman with black eyes and a lot of long black hair. "I know her!" he cried. "I know her like the back of my hand. It's Minna! It's my brother Ben's wife!" He began to put away his brushes. "Where are you going, Dick?" said the young lawyer. "I'm off to my friend Mr. Hobbs," cried Dick. "We've got business to do." And away he ran through the streets of New York to Mr. Hobbs's grocery store. At first, Mr. Hobbs could not understand it. "But why did Minna do it?" he asked. "Money," said Dick. "She always wanted money. She married this Bevis, the Earl's son, for money. And now she wants to get our Cedric's money. Well, she's not going to. You and me, Mr. Hobbs, are going to stop her." Then Mr. Hobbs and Dick began to think carefully. "Dick, you write to Ben, and I'm going to write to Cedric," said Mr. Hobbs. "And that Mr. Havisham, too." "Right," said Dick. "But we need help here, Mr. Hobbs. This is lawyer's work. Why don't I ask that young lawyer? Him with the newspaper." Dick's friend, the young lawyer, was very surprised by the story, but very interested. He began to get busy too, and letters went to California, to London, and to Dorincourt. Chapter 7. Changes at the Castle. Wonderful things always happen quickly. Letters went to and from America and England, and soon Mr. Hobbs, Dick, and Dick's brother Ben were on a ship to England. Things happened quickly because Minna, and it was Minna, was a bad woman, and a stupid one too. When she married Bevis, the Earl's son, she was still Ben's wife. And you can't have two husbands. Her son Tom was 8 years old, not 5. So he was Ben's son, not Bevis's son. She was in a sitting room in the Dorincourt Hotel when the end came. The door opened, and in came 3 people, Mr. Havisham, a big young man, and the Earl of Dorincourt. Minna jumped to her feet with a cry. "Do you know this woman?" Mr. Havisham said to the big young man. "Yes," said Ben. "I know her, and she knows me." And that was the end of Minna. She left the hotel, and nobody ever saw her again. Ben took his son Tom back to California with him, and with the Earl's help, he bought a little farm there. When the Earl left the hotel, he went at once to his carriage. "To Court Lodge," he said to his servant. He came into the sitting room at Court Lodge and found Cedric with his mother. The Earl looked taller and younger, and there was a smile in his black eyes. He looked at his grandson. "So, here," he said, "is Lord Fauntleroy." Mrs. Errol stood up. "Oh, is he truly Lord Fauntleroy?" she asked. The Earl took her hand. "Yes," he answered, "he is." Then he put his other hand on Cedric's head. "Fauntleroy," he said, "ask your mother this. When is she coming to us at the castle?" Lord Fauntleroy put his arms round his mother. "To live with us," he cried. "To live with us always." Mrs. Errol looked at the Earl with her sweet, sad eyes. "We need you," the Earl said. "We need you very much." Dick and Mr. Hobbs did not go back to America at once. The Earl had a talk with Dick, and Dick went back to school, in England this time. His writing got much better, and he began to study to be a lawyer. Mr. Hobbs liked England very much. In the end, he opened a new shop in Dorincourt, and was an important person in the village. People at the castle, of course, always went to his shop, and Cedric was in and out every day to see his old friend. "Are you ever going back to America?" Dick asked Mr. Hobbs when he visited one day. "I don't think so," Mr. Hobbs said. "I like to be near the boy, you see. He's a fine little lord, young Cedric."